Hello everyone, this is Clinton Shane Ekdahl talking to you from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. I am the founder of the Day of the Honeybee campaign that began on May 29th of 2009. Since then I have gathered over 350 municipal and 5 provincial proclamations from jurisdictions all across Canada. 2 were even issued in the United Kingdom and in Turkey. But in Canada, these proclamations represent over 30% of Canada in support of the creation of a new holiday, Day of the Honeybee on May 29th. The reason why this is important is because honeybees and other wild pollinators are keystone species that pollinate most terrestrial flowering plants, and as a result are the foundation of biodiversity of all life on land. Without these pollinators, all we would have left for plants are grasses and other wind-pollinated flora, and the problem is that honeybees and other pollinators are disappearing. One of the main reasons why honeybees and pollinators are disappearing is due to the use of certain pesticides called neonicotinoids, or neonics for short. Neonics are a group of pesticides used in agriculture to protect crops from various pest insects. They are also used for other purposes, including killing insects in homes, controlling fleas on pets, and protecting trees from invasive insects such as the emerald ash borer. There are 3 main neonics currently approved for agricultural use in Canada: imidacloprid, clothianidin, and thiamethoxam. While the manufacturers claim these chemicals are not directly harmful to people or most other animals, all 3 do become systemic in crop tissue, including nectar that honeybees use to make honey and eat in the winter months, and pollen that honeybees use to feed their young. Unfortunately, only around 4 to 5 nanograms are required to kill a honeybee, and direct exposure to pesticide dust released during air drilling can cause express mortality in hives as far as 2 kilometers or farther, depending on wind speed and the terrain. While the environmental levels of neonics surrounding farms do not always obliterate honeybee colonies outright, they instead kill them over extended periods of time due to pesticide buildup in both the soil and the water they drink, and sap collected from nearby trees. Neonics also threaten honeybee queens in particular, which means colonies have lower reproductive rates. Not only are neonic pesticides systemic, they can also be extraordinarily tenacious. Research shows these pesticides can persist in the soil for more than a decade. Neonics are widely used on corn, soy, canola, sugar beets, wheat, ornamentals, and more. While many countries have banned neonics, they are still in widespread use in Canada and the continental United States. In order to protect pollinators, Health Canada cancelled many uses of neonics on crops that pollinators find attractive, such as orchard trees, and they prohibited spraying of some crops, such as berries and fruiting vegetables, before or during bloom. But they have allowed their use on many other crops instead. Unfortunately, Health Canada did not restrict the worst method of application, such as air drilling and other seed coat treatments. And after banning the use of neonics just mentioned, Health Canada later repealed those bans, and now neonics can be used in all manner of harmful ways. And herein lies the problem. Seed coat treatments and air drilling inject seeds into the soil without needing to till the land. This can cause much of the treatment to disperse into the air during application, or later erode onto non-target areas like an apiary or bee farm or nearby wild pollinator forage. Flowers miles away from the application site can take up the pesticides, which seep into every part of the plant, including the pollen and nectar. This plant forage can in turn negatively affect insect pollinators that visit the flower for food, as well as other insects that naturally feed on the plant tissues like caterpillars and beetles. Also, because the pesticides build up in the soil, it can wash away in rain and drain into waterways, affecting every variety of arthropod there. While pesticide persistence in soils, waterways, non-target plants is variable, it can be prolonged. For example, the half-lives of neonics in soils from just one application can exceed 1,000 days. Therefore, they accumulate when used repeatedly, so if the same amount of neonics is used on the same field for the same crop every year around the same time for just 3 years, over 8 times the amount of a single application will accumulate in the soil, which lasts for 3 years or more after the 8th application. Put in another way, concentrations of neonics ranging from 6 to 18 parts per billion remain in the soil 1 year after a treated crop like corn is seeded. After 6 years of repeated applications, soil concentrations of neonics in the soil in the final year of application can range as high as 60 parts per billion. Similarly, neonics can persist in woody plants for periods exceeding 1 year. Honeybees often visit these trees and shrubs to gather ingredients they use to make propolis. Propolis is a red or brown resinous substance made by honeybees and used to fill crevices in their hives and to seal and varnish honeycomb. When studying dead honeybees near cornfields in Ontario, in addition to neonics, scientists also found a combination of herbicides, fungicides, and other pesticides. Surprisingly, neonics were detected more often on pollen from plants other than the corn, such as willow trees, clover, and wildflowers that were located near the intended crop fields. This means that more pesticides is moving off the target than onto the intended crop. Studies of neonic absorption in target crop seed dressings into the seedling and growing plant indicate only 16 to 20% of the active ingredient is absorbed. Thus, although the seed dressings are often stated to provide accurate targeting of the harvest, they result in a considerably smaller proportion of the active ingredient ending up in or on the crop than do traditional spray applications to foliage. While traditional spray pesticides commonly exceed 50% efficiency, 80 to 84% of the neonic seed dressing does not stay on the seed but is lost to erosion, rubs off into the soil, or washes away with ground moisture and rain. And this is most certainly having negative effects on honeybees and other wild pollinators, but also other aquatic insects and arthropods as well. In relation to honeybee mortality, while neonic concentrations in pollen or nectar may be on the order of parts per billion, like in the soil, effects in plants and animal tissues are cumulative over time and may differ between species or, in the case of honeybees, between different members of the society. Studies have shown that neonic exposure at levels well below what causes death can affect a bee's ability to return to the colony, reduce burrowing ability of earthworms, and cause paralysis and impaired walking in beetles. In other words, while the acceptable levels of neonics are not directly causing fatality to these animals in laboratory tests, they are causing functionality issues out in the real world. Nevertheless, a honeybee is as good as dead if it cannot find its hive, and worms and beetles are as good as gone if they cannot evade predators. Neonics not only reduce honeybee survival, but they can damage the hive immune system. Honeybees, termites, ants, and some wasps use social immunity, a tactic used to clean out the dead and sick individuals from the hive. Honeybees in colonies treated with clethianidin display a marked reduction in the survival behavior over time. In other words, sick bees were staying in the hive, in turn infecting others, dying in the hive, and fewer workers were able to clean out the dead, offering up more opportunities for harmful pathogens to thrive. In addition, other chemicals like fungicides make neonics more toxic. The most common fungicide, boscalid, does not affect honeybee mortality on its own, but when honeybees are exposed to this fungicide in combination with the neonic clethianidin, twice as many honeybees are killed with half the amount of neonic pesticide. The same was true if another neonic was present, thiamethoxam. Neonics are now the most widely used insecticides in the world. They act systemically, traveling through all plant tissues, and are widely applied as seed coat dressings. As neurotoxins, they have high toxicity levels to most pest arthropods. However, neonics commonly exceed the LD50, or the concentration which kills 50% of individuals, for beneficial arthropods like honeybees and other insect pollinators. Although vertebrates are less susceptible to neonicotinoids than arthropods, consumption of small numbers of dressed seeds has shown direct mortality in birds and mammals. Because neonics are likely to impact a wide array of non-target fauna, including above-ground pollinators as well as underground and aquatic invertebrates, they threaten a staggering range of ecosystems. Neonics are nevertheless generally more toxic to insects in minute quantities. For example, the LD50 for ingestion of imidacloprid and clethianidin in honeybees is 5 and 4 nanograms per insect respectively. In comparison, neonics are approximately 10,000 times more effective than DDT. Concentrations in plant tissues and sap between 5 and 10 parts per billion are generally regarded as sufficient to provide protection against pest insects, but are high enough to cause functionality issues and death in many other insects, including pollinators. For example, in citrus trees treated with imidacloprid via irrigation water, 5 parts per billion in xylem fluids was sufficient to control the sap-sucking insect Homolodisca coagulate. However, that level reaches the LD50 of honeybees in both imidacloprid and clethianidin that would use the sap to make propolis. In developed countries, neonics are predominantly used as seed dressings for a broad variety of crops such as canola, sunflower, cereals, beets, and potatoes. For example, in the UK, seed dressing accounted for 91% of all neonic use in farming in 2011. Globally, 60% of neonics are used in this way, and remember that only 15 to 20% of this chemical actually stays on the seed, while the remainder is building up in the soil and river systems or ending up as aerial pesticide drift. One main attraction of seed dressings is that they require no action from the farmer, prophylactically protecting all parts of the crop for several months after sowing. They can be applied as a soil drench or in irrigation water to defend perennial crops such as vines, and they can be injected into trees to protect against herbivores, where a single application can provide protection for several years. Their advantages of low toxicity to vertebrates, high toxicity to insects, flexible use, and systemic activity led to neonics swiftly becoming amongst the most widely used pesticides globally. They are now used more than any other class of insecticides and comprise approximately 3/4 of all insecticides used. They are licensed for use in more than 120 countries and have a global market value of $2.6 billion, with imidacloprid comprising 41% of this market, being the second most widely used agrochemical in the world. Many studies have examined the toxicity of neonics to both target and non-target organisms, including mammals, birds, fish, insects, crustaceans, mollusks, and annelids. Insects are consistently among the most sensitive taxa, whether exposed via direct contact or ingestion. While most studies assess only mortality and are carried out over short periods, it is clear that sublethal effects such as reduced feeding, disorientation, irregular or halted movement, and slowed or halted reproduction can be elicited by much lower doses. For example, feeding of E. longimanus nymphs was reduced for 4 days following exposure to water containing only 0.1 parts per billion of imidacloprid for 24 hours. In the end, regardless of how successful neonics are to pest control on crops, their overall negative effects on surrounding plants and non-target animals is too great for their use to continue in Canada. There is no doubt that neonics are harming other non-pest insects such as honeybees and other wild pollinators, earthworms, and aquatic organisms. There is also no doubt that these chemicals have a much longer half-life than their annual use, and as a result build up in both the soil and surrounding terrestrial and aquatic environments. Therefore, it is the goal of Day of the Honeybee to call upon the Government of Canada to immediately place a moratorium on these poisons. We cannot wait until one or more of our insect pollinators are destroyed before we do something to stop this fate, because without our pollinators our food supply will be in jeopardy and produce such as you see here may become more difficult to buy. Thank you for watching. All the information gathered here came from the Environmental Science and Pollution Research International, the Government of Canada, Mother Earth News, PBS NewsHour, the Royal Society of Chemistry Environmental Chemistry Group, and the David Suzuki Foundation. For more information, join the Facebook group Dave the Honeybee. Video and photo collage courtesy of pexels.com. This presentation was prepared by Clinton Shane Ekdahl.